Welcome everyone to this development session. And this development session, I tried to talk about ascension and the way that we think. And I was looking today at just kind of like the third dimension, the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension as we shift through these times. Now, it's very interesting in the sense that we are multidimensional beings. So we exist in all these dimensions, right? Even if we think about a thought starts in the first dimension, we have multiple bodies, our etheric body, our mental and emotional bodies. It's all working and vibrating in different frequencies. And sometimes I get asked the question, what dimension do I live in at? And that is a difficult question because we have, as humans, a very linear way of looking at things. We see things, especially when we work in the third dimension, which is the one we'll start with. It's very much kind of like we look at something that needs to be achieved or labeled, or, we like to put things into categories. But I thought it would be a good place to start in talking about what ascension actually is. Now, ascension can mean different things to different people. And, ascension, literally, the word means to ascend, to rise up, or to climb. Okay. Now, ascension, put in its very simple state, and like, for example, the Eastern concept of Buddhism, it's to become enlightened or to understand. And the more I carry on in this journey, the more I realize that we are really here to really understand ourselves, to get to know who we are in all various aspects. And that's what makes this life absolutely so beautiful, because it really is a life of self-discovery and shifting through and growing and expanding while we are here. And as we grow and get to know more about who we are, as we get to release the conformity, the structures, the limiting beliefs that we have chosen, we start to really expand and start to realize that we are multidimensional beings and that we are super powerful as well. So the more we also grow, the more we start to realize the interconnectivity that we all have, right? So, for example, there's no accident that the group that has joined us tonight is the group that joined us tonight, because there is something that threads us all together, whether it's experience, whatever it may be. So in the mystical sense, ascension is the highest state of man or humanity. And that's where, as a collective conscious, we're trying to shift into this greater understanding of knowing that we are one with the Creator. And that's very hard to fathom at the beginning stages, especially in a very limited kind of stages as well. So, for example, when I was little, and there was very much a hierarchy when it came to spiritual beings, and it was like, man can never talk to the angels because we're just not at that frequency, right? And even then now, and perhaps in that time, the vibrational frequency was too dense, whereas now we're starting to expand, we're starting to ascend, we're starting to vibrate at a different frequency. That connection to these beings that are of a higher frequency becomes a little bit easier and more tangible and more common in that sense. And when we talk about ascension, we talk about shifting through not only our physical, our mental and emotional beings, and through the different planes as well, from one reality to another. So we look at ascension through physical ascension and conscious ascension. And that's what I would like to kind of like talk to you about, because it's not that we reach a level of sixth dimensional, fifth dimensional, whatever, there's so many dimensions now, but way of being, we have multiple hangups in all of these. And it's some concepts we might understand at a fifth dimensional conscious level of oneness, whereas some other concepts, for example, judging others, is still very much a third dimensional frequency of being. So we might grow in certain areas, and in other areas we're still kind of like a little bit stuck. So kind of like how some of us are better in one subject at school than the other, we excel, but there's still those other subjects that we need to work hard on. And you can relate that possibly to the dimensional states of being. So when I started thinking, okay, what do I look at 3D? 3D is the most common one for us. It's the one that we're most familiar with. It's the one that we've grown up with. And it's the one we're trying to kind of like most aspects move away from. Now, this is very much the physical state of being. And when we're very much in that physical state of being, we realize that everything revolves, it's the physical body. Even if we look at medicine, which is needed, no matter what dimension we are having a physical experience, we need Western medicine to help us in certain things. But what happens is the reason we need Western medicine is because Western medicine is very much built in for the third dimensional physical aspect of who we are, which is quite interesting because it actually doesn't look at the other multidimensional aspects. It is starting to now as we consciously become more awake and aware, but in very general, it's very much in your head. It's very logical. It's very physical. It's X plus Y equals Z. You know, it's very linear in many, many ways. And we need it because we are physical beings, right? When we're in this space, we also look at our concepts. A 3D concept is very much, you know, it's all about me versus the we. It's the I achieved this, the I did that, the I have a house and a car, I have these pair of jeans that are whatever label. They are very much the accumulation of things. And that is, and I'm not saying one is bad or not, I'm just saying this is what we tend to look at, or the outlook that we have on a conscious level in the third dimension. It's all about the survival of the fittest. Now, if you think about that, and we look at the animal realm also has very many dimensions, and that is a very rude, can I use that word, as in rudimentary, very primitive way of thinking. It's the survival of the fittest. We start seeing things in a very kind of linear way. Time is very linear. Money is finite. So, you know, that's why there's that competition, because I need to get more, you know, if I'm to survive. There's a lack of mentality, I drew some notes here, and perception that there's not enough for everyone. In this state, on an emotional level, we are addicted to drama, we're addicted to pain, we're addicted to maintaining the paradigm or the archetype of victim. We're very much in that jealousy. These are the emotions that we feel, rage. And it's not to say that rage or anger, whatever the emotions can be felt in another dimension, they can, absolutely. But when we're feeling kind of like anger in this dimension, it tends to linger a lot longer. We tend to be hold on to these emotions. We hold on to these pains because they define us. We hold on to these handicaps that we give ourselves because it's those excuses of why we're, you know, why we're not excelling in the way we think we should be excelling, right? There's a lot of judgment in our way of thoughts in this realm. The way of thinking is very much about the physical laws. You know, the government says we need to do this. This is the law. You know, you do not question the doctor. You do not, you know, all the rest of that. That is very much very linear, very masculine energy in this state as well. And in the third dimensional state, it's all to support the physical form, right? So that's why we tend to look at materialistic things. We start to think my way is the right way. We don't open up to different perceptions. We spend very much time in our heads as well. And this is also when it's interesting, because when we look at money, we're always trying to get, you know, the best deal, bargain the person down to the minimum, and that's the achievement. And when I learned that lesson, and I'm going to give this example, we value things in a very different way. It's not really quality, it's the quantity sometimes, or, you know, whatever it may be. We have certain perceptions around money. And I remember being in South Africa, the last time that I was there was about maybe 5 years ago when I went to South Africa. And in Cape Town, there is this beautiful market full of like African curios, and a lot of the artists come and they bring their work and all the rest of that. And I remember negotiating. I used to be a really good negotiator. I was negotiating pricing. And I negotiated these handcrafted soapstone animals that I thought I'd bring back so I could give to other people. And I was on a budget and all the rest of that. And I bargained down this guy so much that I really got them for quite a good price. And then afterwards it dawned on me, and I was like, you know, I really did not need to haggle all that much, because one, I undermined the beauty of his creation, and two, this is his living. He's probably got family at home, and honestly, I probably could have afforded to give him a little bit more, and that would have put better fruit on the table. And from then, my thoughts about pricing and actually valuing people's work changed, and providing the value. And then I really started to see the exchange of energy for that. So I felt like it's one of the things I needed to work through was the that frequency of money and how that worked in that aspect. Because when I was about 21, I also went to Hong Kong, and we were in Shenzhen, where they do all the knockoff kind of things as well. And I was even worse then. And I think those two instances where, so I went into one of the stores in Shenzhen, and I managed to also kind of like negotiate, because the thing is, my cousin challenged me. She was like, whenever I go to the market, she's like, hey, what prices did you get? And I was like, oh, I got a good price. She's like, I probably could have gotten better. So that day I was on this mission, you know, that competition, which is very much 3D. And I negotiated in one of the stores in Shenzhen, I think, and I used to live in the UK back then, I think I got like 7 pairs of runners of various kind of like knockoff brands. And I think at that time was like for £50, so like $100. And it was so bad that by the time I got them back, at the end of the day, I still had I still had money left. And it was closer to the end of the day. The lady had already made her money. And she looked at me when I went in the store, she went like, no, you not come in. No, I know sell you anymore. So it's kind of like, it's those things where pricing started to really kind of like, you know, I started valuing things in a different perspective, and I started looking at time and energy and all the rest of that. One could say that if you look at it from a different perspective, that, you know, they could have said no and negotiated what their value was and their worth. But you know, that is a different, we're looking into the 4th dimensional aspect where we ourselves start to look into that. But carrying on with the 3rd dimensional way of being, this is the state where a lot of us call the being asleep state. They're very much the routine, you know, this is what life should look like, working 9 to 5, come home, have dinner, watch TV, sleep, rinse, repeat. And it's this kind of like this mundane kind of like very much life that a lot of us live and have lived and are working to change. Those of you that are listening to this will probably be very much into that. This is also the dimension where we're very judgmental. We see things as good and bad. We see things as high and low. We start to, it's all about those laws and those strong, rigid morals, and we're not flexible because this is what this should look like, right? And that's a very safe space for us when we're asleep, right? Time over here is also very, very linear, and we need to hold appointments. Sometimes we have to have that. And I remember thinking, like I used to get so annoyed in corporate, and it's true in that realm it works, because you'd have a meeting with 10 people, in a space, and somebody would be 10 minutes late. 10 minutes times all the time of the people sitting in the boardroom, it becomes a very expensive 10 minutes. And I could understand that from that perspective, of a company perspective, at losing money when people were late, right? But it's also the honoring of people's time as well. I remember I used to get so pissed off. I'd be like, why is their time more important than mine, right? When I was thinking in the state of being as well. When we're in the state of being, there's also a resistance to going within, okay? Looking at what is it that we've suppressed. We tend to just ignore it and move on. Okay. And even still, some days, like no matter what you do, that is very much a human habit of like, suck it up, move on, because that served us in the past, right? Ego is very present in this dimension as well, trying to keep us safe, trying to keep us small. Okay. We very much live for comfort as well, so we'll take something just in case, instead of like waiting and experiencing it, for example. So we look at very much in our heads all the time, and it's very much my way is the right way, very rigid, and that comes with the density of this dimension as well. We also don't really work with creation, right? It's kind of like the resources to serve us, and not for us to work, one-on-one with the planet. We start to see it's the very much self-centered, I, me, my, state of being. Okay. When we start kind of like awaken, we start jumping into kind of like looking at more of a thought process, which I see as being in the fourth dimensional way of being. And the fourth dimension is all about transcendence, moving past what we understand and know. And the only way we do that is usually when we reach the state is where there's been something that has shifted our reality, and we start to think, okay, there must be more than just this 3D way of thinking. Okay. We start realizing we're not just a physical body. We're, our mental body, our energetic body, we have an aura. There's an etheric aspect of us that energizes everything. We start to think, okay, dreams, could I actually be traveling in my dreams, kind of a thing. Also, the 3D way of eating is very much preservatives, it's very much junk food, it's very much, and that's what I'm saying, we need a balance of all, right? And we're all dimensions all the time. But it's very much that, when we start looking at the fourth dimension, we become observant. What am I feeding my physical form? What am I feeding my emotional form? What am I feeding my mental form, right? And the fourth dimension is a lot of the times is where kind of like the elementals live. It's a lot of where spirits live. So we start to really tap into our extrasensory perceptions. We start wanting to expand our intuition. We start wanting to really tap in to our, ourselves, and we start looking at what's happening in the heart, right? The fourth dimension is really the gateway to the fifth dimension. And, here we start to think that, wait a minute, our thoughts are actually quite powerful. And in this state of awakening, we start to shift and become a little bit more patient, because we go through that trauma, we go through that, we start looking at shadow, we start to understand, hey, wait a minute, there's something more out there, and I really can't continue to live and continue being in the way that I am, right? Or I have been. And we need to stop judging ourselves in that time, and we start to understand, okay, people are people, because we start looking within, okay? And we start becoming less judgmental, because we start realizing that we've been doing all the things that we've been judging others for, which is quite interesting when it comes to that. And it can be, a lot of this transformation is very, very, what we say, painful, because it's a lot of it is dense. It's dense emotions, dense feelings, dense, like, traumatic experiences that we have been through, right? And here time starts to shift. Time starts to, we can start to speed up time, slow down time. We start looking at time as not being so linear anymore. And we start to get a little bit more observant of that. And we become a little bit more understanding and compassionate for each other as well. There's a experience, still a bit of duality here, but we start to see things as they are, not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, but we start to think, okay, let's observe this, what is behind that, right? And we start to expand and get to know who we are all the time. We also start realizing how our actions actually affect the environment around us, how we work with, like, nature, and we start to become a little bit more conscious of our awareness. So we start bringing a lot of the subconscious into the conscious state of being, and we start trying to palpate what is happening in these other dimensions. And we also start to become curious and start to expand. We start to not necessarily move away from man laws, but we start to question man's law, and we start to look at universal law when we're in this dimension, okay? And yeah, time becomes more fluid. We start to process things. We start to learn to co-create in that sense. So very much from moving from a corporate world to a spiritual world, or a more conscious way of being, or a more ascended way of being, or trying to ascend to mode of being. That for me was one of the hardest bits in moving from being very action orientated. So it's kind of like action reaction, action, like, I need to phone this person, I pick up the phone and I phone them, and I get the information that I need. That is very much still needed. So we need that third dimensional way of being. But when we start working more in a spiritual sense, we start to co-create. And there we start to realize that our thoughts, fueled by our emotions, and then put into place by our actions, is what creates the world around us. We also start to trust the universe a little bit more. So we start working with these various dimensions. And usually, once we start reaching the top of that fourth dimensional way, and it's not linear, okay? I'm speaking it in a linear aspect because it's the way we logically understand things a little bit better. But once we start really looking at another aspect of our ascension, we start to realize that we are really creating the reality around us. So in the third dimension, things are happening to us. In the fourth dimension, we start realizing that, wait a minute, things are happening for us, and then when we start looking at the fifth dimension, we start looking at, why did I create this, and how can I create moving forward? Because then we start taking responsibility for those thoughts, those emotions, and those actions, right? When we're in the fourth dimension, and this is called the awakening phase, because we start asking, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Okay. And in this one, we start looking at following our passion. We start looking at, okay, what brings us joy? We start to look for bringing in the vibrational frequency of joy more often. And we start looking at the emotion of, okay, how can I direct my anger that's in alignment, right? We start looking at, why did that make me angry? What is that story that I'm telling myself? And when we start looking at the healing within this dimensional state of being, we start to kind of like look at the mental and emotional aspect of the healing. Okay, so have I been carrying this anger, and how is it being reflected in my body? Okay. We really start to look at, okay, I need to reconnect with nature. Nature is my medicine. We start to feel one with the planet as well. And we try to experience as many things as we can. And we start to definitely expand on our intuition, for sure. And we start experiencing kind of like the 6 extrasensory perceptions. The other thing that starts to happen is when we start tapping into the fourth dimension, and we start to really co-create, the language that comes back is the synchronicities, the numbers, the messages through songs. We start to open up to this dimension, and we start to receive the messages. We might start to connect to the elementals. We start to realize we have dragons and all the rest of that. And we start to get like, there becomes a deeper meaning to life, okay? But it's not to say that we're still straddling some concepts that we're very, very ingrained in us in the third dimensional frequency. When we start to heal in the fourth dimension, there's many modalities that will take you through the trauma and rebirth it and change it, okay? So this still becomes very, very kind of like, I'm trying to think of a modality that we used to use or that I've been experienced to, kind of like origin healing, where you will go through almost, relive that purpose. And anyone within the origin healing, what happens is they create a constellation and they have people standing in for the various people within your lives. And, they go through certain traumas that you went through, and you start seeing things from an aerial perspective. This is very much a very rudimentary overview that I'm giving you, but the people that are in those positions, it helps them heal as well. But you very much go through a very feeling of that, and it's can sometimes take a long time, because there's still that hesitancy from our third dimensional way of thinking, where there's a lot of muscle memory, where we need to start changing the habits that we had, start changing the habits of what we were doing, what we were thinking, and what we were feeling towards certain things. And we're always in a progressive space, right? And we need to be in different dimensions at different times. And that's why I don't prescribe to I'm a fifth dimensional, I've reached this. No, we still have different aspects, and we need to work with these different dimensions because we are having a physical experience. So very much in the fourth dimensional healing, we're looking at healing on a physical, mental, etheric, and an emotional. So it's all 4 bodies. We start looking at the healing within that, because we start to realize that the physical body is the end protocol of that disease or that ailment or that emotion that we've ignored or that trauma that we've suppressed, right? So all of this starts to kind of surface. And sometimes we do need to experience that, because that's how we release it. We need to, not the issues, not the right word, the suggestions that I would give is that when we start expanding our consciousness, we need to make sure that we clear or work through all aspects of us. So this is still very important because we're having a physical experience. So we need to embody the changes that we are making. Okay, so we can't forget about the 3D physical body that still needs to be taken care of. When we're in the fourth dimension, sometimes a lot of us start to actually, or mostly in a fourth dimensional consciousness, we start to, our physical body then starts to need to catch up to our energetic field, because as we release trauma, as we do the healing, as we start to expand and get to know who we are, our vibrational frequency starts to change. And in this dimension, we start to see things all as frequency and vibration. So we'll walk into a space where we don't feel comfortable because we're picking up with our extra senses what is happening, you know, on a multidimensional level. And we start to think, okay, no, I can't be in this space. You know, I can't be in drama anymore. I can't be in, because the vibrational frequency is too much. But what happens is that once we start to have this understanding, and once we start to release the baggage on a mental and emotional and etheric level, the physical body needs to catch up. So our physical cells start to vibrate at a different frequency, our DNA starts to change, and we start to really have physical ascension symptoms. So for example, one of them could be that heavy meats or processed foods don't agree with our physical body anymore, because the vibrational frequency of the food that we're putting into the vibrational frequency of the body that has changed, there's no match anymore. So a lot of us start to develop allergies, gluten, you know, some of us need to stop eating meat, and we start to eat a little bit lighter as our consciousness starts to expand, because our body needs to vibrate to match or catch up with where we are energetically, because everything is interconnected. Okay, so we'll have certain cravings, right? And even sometimes we will need to crave like sugar, or we will crave a burger because we're needing to ground into the third dimension sometimes. So that, you know, we need this groundedness, and that's why sometimes we crave certain foods. But a lot of the times our body starts to reject a lot of the foods, and the lighter the food, the quicker it is to digest, the quicker it is to adapt to the frequency as well. So remember, everything is frequency and vibration. Everything is. From the food, from water, from our thoughts, from our energy, it's all that, right? We start to value money in a different way. We start to look at money as an energy, and we start to see it as an exchange of energy. And we start to become conscious of, okay, you know, this is, you know, it's, you know, I need to put food on the table. I value my service. We start kind of like looking at our worth, our value. And we start looking at how we work within this world, right? So it's very much, we start to see money in a different aspect. And we start to notice that it isn't limited, it is fluid. So, and that's more of a fifth dimensional kind of concept, that it can be replaced. So in the fourth dimension, we start to realize, okay, you know, there is more, and we're not limited by what we create, right? We're only limited by our actions, by our reactions, and by what we do. Let's just see, we have a deeper meaning to life, and yeah, start looking for synchronicities, and we start to become a little bit more patient as well. We start actioning and then observing how does it come back, and it might not come back in a way that we expect. So the kindness that we share with somebody might not necessarily come back from that person, but we're starting to now work with the universal laws. So because we're being generous, we will attract generosity, and it doesn't necessarily need to come from the same person. It might come from somewhere else. Okay, so there we start to really look at the action reaction. We start to really look at the energy that we put out in a physical, mental, and emotional state. Okay. So as we start realizing, okay, we start saying, okay, time isn't linear. We start to look at this different concepts. We start to look at past lives. We start to look at, you know, okay, we're multidimensional beings. We start to, one of the biggest things that I learned was, I used to have this belief that my soul was complete and whole and just connected to this body. But in a meditation a few years ago, I realized, no, this is just an aspect of me. And then when we start to look at the fifth dimensional aspect, we start to realize there's no longer unconditional love is unconditional for all. And I think we're still moving towards that. If we still continue to see an I am, you know, me and you, that is a condition already. So we start to realize that on a fifth dimensional way of being is that we're all interconnected. Somehow we're all one, okay? And it's quite interesting in that sense because we really start to look at what is being mirrored to me, not only the bad stuff, but the good stuff as well. So I am mirroring something to you and you are mirroring something to me always. And we are just a different aspect of ourselves. So just like I am a different aspect of you, you're a different aspect of me, having a different experience, okay? And when we start to look at this, it's a little bit, we're like, yeah, but I'm individual. Yes, we are. But this is where I like to use the example of a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread makes the whole, but it's the individual slices that make the loaf of bread, if that makes sense. So yes, we are an individual slice of bread, but we're a combination of the whole. Okay. We start to see that now we start to play. Now we start to really see how powerful we are, and we start to consciously create the world around us. So we start to create affirmations to kind of like shift our way of thinking, to shift our thought process. We start to, okay, how do I manifest this? What do I want to manifest? But more importantly, we start to trust into the universe again, because we start to work with those energies. So we release the how. Okay, and we start to go, okay, this is what I want to create. And then the opportunities start to present themselves to us. And then we choose whether we act on them or not. Okay. Here we start to realize that we can create anything and everything we want. Here we start to realize that we create our own reality. We create our own timelines. We choose. And the bigger the decision we make, the bigger the shift in the timeline, the bigger the shift in the reality that we create. We start being really, really happy about bills because we've manifested the money to be able to do that. You know, we start changing the perception of like frequency, and we start really seeing that things are very, very fluid. We also stop to drop the judgment, okay? And this is important because we start to realize that everybody has their own purpose. Everybody's come to shift, come to experience something, and that's what they've chosen. So the judgment starts to dissipate. We also stop judging ourselves, and we start going through, it becomes a little bit easier to shift through our shit, just so to speak, because we start to recognize, oh, okay, this is a pattern that I've been doing. This is something I need to shift in my behavior or shift in my consciousness. I understand why I've been doing it, but I don't beat myself up for months or punish myself for doing it. I go, okay, I'm going to change that moving forward. So we don't hold on, we let go of things, we release things a little bit more, and we step into a new state of being. And that in itself helps us to vibrate at a different frequency yet again. And once we start to do that, it becomes doing the shadow work becomes a little bit, I'm not going to say easy because it's not the right word, but we start to tackle it with ease. And we start to embody the changes a lot faster because we understand it on a mental, we understand it on a heart level, and we start to move forward. Here in the fifth dimension, we start to really align the heart and the head together, so that when we're in alignment with our heart and our head, we're actually being led by our soul. And that's where the blueprint comes into very much into play and becomes very, very important in kind of like, okay, what have I come to experience, and how can I, really create a life that I want? What is my passion? What is my purpose? What is my mission here on this planet? And we start to step into that. Okay. And we also, our body changes again. We start looking at maybe my portions are, I don't need so much food, right? We start looking, things start to change. Again, we're multidimensional beings, and our physical, mental, and emotional world will reflect or expand to what, we're shifting through. My guys are just reminding me, we didn't finish talking about the ascension symptoms. So for example, a lot of people are awakening now, and those that have been awakened for a while are going deeper into another level of awakening. So a lot of us will be going through ascension symptoms yet again, where you're sometimes looking at tiredness, fatigue. So a lot of the times adrenals is a sign of an ascension symptom. Sometimes we have a cold or a flu that comes in. If there is no fever, again, it's ascension symptoms. Your body is releasing, letting go, getting rid of stuff that is no longer in alignment. Don't forget, our physical bodies, our cells are constantly rejuvenating, they're regenerating. So we're constantly building a new body, really. We also start looking at stronger feelings of love. We start to feel more. There's more connectedness with others. And sometimes a big part of the ascension symptom is also impatience, right? Because we start to focus our time and what we do on our passion, and anything that isn't that, the frequency, there's a bit of a jarring of the frequency, and sometimes it can be shown as annoyedness or whatever it may be, or having lack of patience. But remember that again is another trigger, because it's looking at that compassionate side of it and going, okay, this is what it is, and let's start to move through that, right? We really start to connect to the planet. We really start to listen. We start to connect and with the ascended masters, the different species that are out there. A lot of the times we start to connect to our alien beings because we've lived on many planets, and we start to open up and expand into that as well. Yeah, we entered all connected world. And yeah, we start looking at people and understanding their value and their worth, and we start seeing their potential, and we start stepping into our potential, and we start to commit to our purpose and to our mission as to why we are here. But it very much comes from a space of love and compassion. And we start to see life as an adventure, and we start to see how beautiful it is and how everything is so interconnected. And here we start to then work with our bloodlines, and we start to shift the generations that are here. And we start to realize that any work that we do has an effect, on so many more. So not only our ancestors, we are, the collective. And Stephanie is right. We start to shed the cords that tie us, that anchor us to the various concepts, to the various people, to the various emotions. And as we shed these cords, we are no longer anchored. And I love to use the example of the hot air balloon, right? The more stones, the more weight we throw over, which is our baggage, the more we're able to ascend, the more we're able to connect to other realms and other realities. And yeah, we start to realize that we are powerful beings, and we start to realize that we are one with the creator. And we are the creator. We are an aspect of the creator. We are. And that kind of like, to step into that is sometimes a little bit scary, and constantly needing to push ourselves into that. Here we realize that there's no competition, and that there's enough for everyone, and that we are the universe, and the universe is infinite. And here we start to really trust with blind faith. We really surrender, we let go, and we really start to co-create. We start living our truth. We cannot, like, a lot of us tend to go through that, oh, I can't do chit chat anymore, because it's like, no, I'm looking for my joy. I need to go deeper. I need to understand more. And our intuition starts to expand, and we start to see things and feel things and hear things and just know things. And we start to realize that the knowledge is within us, because we are the universe at all times. And we celebrate people's successes. We celebrate with them. We celebrate them. There's none of this kind of like, oh, they're doing this and I'm not, or they're better than I am, then I'm not. No, we start to really understand that this is the journey of us, and we start to really look at the expansion of ourselves, because if we expand ourselves, we expand all those around us, which is very interesting in that sense. And yeah, and that's just very much, I'm just trying to see, oh, for example, I had put here, when we channel, depending on what we're channeling it from different dimensions, right? So what I was trying to go with that is that, you know, you can channel something that is quite earthly, for example, you know, a rock or a house or whatever it is. You can channel the message, or you can channel something from the fourth dimension, a loved one that's has transitioned, or an elemental in the fourth dimension, or you can channel an ascended master in the fifth dimension, and not to mention the other dimensions coming, you know, above that, when we start to really, really connect. So what I was trying to say with that is that we are multidimensional beings. Our consciousness and our expansion is at different dimensions, and dimensions isn't something we achieve, it's something we vibrate at. Okay, kind of like the information in the Akashic records, it's not something we achieve, it's something we vibrate at, and then we're actually have, you know, access to everything. And I also think that the Akashic records is on all dimensions, and we are a walking, talking version of the Akashic records, but understanding them just helps us to navigate all these a little bit more. So I hope that this has helped, and I will open up to questions.